Hey travelers, welcome back to You Can Certainly Try Daggerheart. I think we're going to keep it. Anyway, today we're going to dive headfirst into the combat mechanics presented in the Daggerheart core rulebook. We'll look at each mechanic, try to figure out how it works, and then we'll put them all together in an example combat scenario at the end of this video. Now, if you've watched any of my previous videos on the topic, you may have some familiarity with how these mechanics work. I'll try to link related videos into the cards above, just for reference. So here we go. Let's start with the fundamentals. In Daggerheart, the combat is both cinematic and narrative driven. To understand it, you'll need to understand a few basic concepts such as movement, the spotlight, duality dice, action and reaction rolls, damage thresholds, armor, stress, hope and fear, and GM moves. Easy, right? Okay, so let's start with ranges and movement. Now, it's important to mention right at the top that in Daggerheart, they use narrative positioning, meaning you don't need a grid or hexagons, though you can use an overlay if you prefer. The ranges are as follows: melee, which is within touching distance; very close, which is 5 to 10 feet; close, which is 10 to 30 feet; far, which is 30 to 100 feet; very far, which is 100 to 300 feet; and out of range. Now, if the player has the spotlight, they can move up to close range, or 10 to 30 feet, and still perform some kind of an act. Now, they can go further, but that's going to require them to perform an agility roll. And as we all know, the more you roll, the more chances your GM has to steal that spotlight away from you. Now, you might be asking, well, Ghost, what's the spotlight? Well, I'm glad you asked. The spotlight is the focus of a scene that gets passed from one player to the next, or to the GM. When the player has the spotlight, they can use that opportunity to move up to close range, like we mentioned, perform an attack, use a feature, cast a spell, or sprint within far range. When the player is done acting, they'll take that spotlight and they'll pass it to another place that makes the most narrative sense. It could be another player, but if they've rolled with fear or failed a roll, it gets passed to the GM. But the GM can spend a fear to steal that spotlight back from the players, or interrupt should a golden opportunity, as the rulebook states, presents itself. Now, this is intentionally vague. Think of this as a player's actions have direct and immediate consequences. The GM can also take the spotlight if the players all look to them for what happens next. Now, this could be player uncertainty, or the narrative just naturally flows to the GM or an adversary. Okay, duality dice. We've talked about this extensively in the channel. Look to the card above. Now, you're going to roll two distinctly different d12s. One will act as your hope die, one will act as your fear die. You'll then pick a trait that's relevant to your action, be it agility, strength, finesse, instinct, presence, or knowledge. You'll add any modifiers for that trait, as well as any experiences that you've spent a hope to add, and calculate your advantage and disadvantage. You'll roll all your dice, you'll add them all together. If your hope die is higher, you've rolled with hope. If your fear die is higher, you've rolled with fear. A critical success is when your hope and your fear die are the same value. Now, when this happens, you'll gain a hope and you'll clear a stress. You can succeed or fail any of your rolls with hope and fear. If you roll with hope, regardless of the outcome, you gain a hope. If you roll with fear, regardless of the outcome, the GM gains a fear. Now let's talk reaction rolls. Reaction rolls are typically to avoid or dodge an area effect or a hazard. When you perform this roll, you don't roll for hope or fear, you roll to succeed or fail. A critical success with a reaction roll means you ignore all negative effects that may occur with that situation. Okay, let's get into the nitty-gritty: attacks and damage. An attack roll is simply an action roll with the intent to do harm. If you succeed in your attack roll, you'll roll for damage. Your proficiency and your weapon will dictate how many and of what type of dice you use to make your damage roll. All right, let's talk critical damage. Now, if your attack roll is a critical success, you take your damage dice and you roll them. Now, you take that rolled number and you add it to the maximum possible value that those dice allow. You add those numbers together, and that is your damage for that attack. So how does this work with damage thresholds? Well, I'm glad you asked. You take your rolled damage and you compare it to your target's damage thresholds. This dictates how many hit points they lose. If your damage number falls just below that first threshold, you've done minor damage, and that target marks 1 hit point. If your damage gets over that first threshold, you've gone into major damage, and that target marks 2 hit points. If your damage gets over this top threshold, you're into severe damage, and that's 3 hit points. But wait, it doesn't stop there. In Daggerheart, there's an optional rule called massive damage. Now, this occurs when you roll double the severe threshold, your target marks 4 hit points. This is the maximum amount of base damage that can occur in Daggerheart. I use this rule at my table, and I'll use this rule later in our example. Now, this is a great time to talk about your armor score. Now, an armor score is equal to the number of armor slots available for the equipment that you're wearing. You can mark 1 armor slot per attack to reduce your damage by 1 threshold. A severe damage becomes major, major becomes minor, and minor gets canceled out. Oof. And when that last hit point gets marked, you'll have to make a death move. Now, this is totally your choice, but here are your options. You can choose to go out in a blaze of glory. This is a critical success on 1 final action, and then you die. You can avoid death by falling unconscious, unable to be attacked, and remain that way until you gain 1 hit point, or you take a long rest. But you'll want to be careful, because you take a hope die when this happens, and you roll it. If it's equal or less than your current level, you permanently lose 1 hope slot, and you gain a narrative scar. And finally, you can risk it all. You take your duality dice and you roll for it. If it's with fear, you die. If it's with hope, you take its value and you distribute it to gain hit points or clear stress. If it's a critical success, you clear all stress and gain all of your hit points back. It's that easy. Clear all stress, what does that even mean? Well, in Daggerheart, stress is a way to track mental and physical strain. Once you've marked all of the stress off your character sheet, you receive the condition vulnerable until you manage to clear at least one of those stresses. Now, if you've marked all of your stress and you need to mark 1 more, well, unfortunately, you'll find yourself marking a hit point instead. Now, there are conditions such as vulnerable or hidden or restrained that impose advantage or disadvantage on rolls related to that target. Now, we talked about hope and fear. This is the economy used by players and the GM. Hope is the primary resource for players. You gain it when you roll with hope, and you spend it to help an ally, to utilize an experience, to initiate a tag team roll, and to activate a hope feature on your class or domain card. Okay, so fear. We've talked about GMs stealing the spotlight with it, but what else can they do with fear? As discussed, GMs gain fear whenever the player rolls with fear, and they can hold a maximum of 12. With fear, GMs have the ability to steal the spotlight, to keep the spotlight for consecutive actions. They can trigger an adversary's fear feature, or they can raise the stakes from incidental, using 0 to 1 fear, to cinematic, using 6 to 12 fear. GM moves range from soft, which could be revealing a truth or signaling danger, to hard, shifting the environment or forcing a character to mark a stress. In combat, a GM can spend a fear to spotlight an adversary, and with that spotlight, make them move within close range and attack or perform an adversary action, clear a condition, sprint within far or very far range, or really do anything that the fiction demands, which is intentionally open-ended. Okay, so that was a lot, and you might be thinking, okay, Ghost, great, but how do I make all of these mechanics work in tandem to create this fiction-first, narrative-focused experience? Well, that's a great question, and we're going to answer that using a combat scenario right after this word from our sponsor. Hey friends, have you ever wondered how to bring your ttrpg characters to life with just the right look? Well, in our Daggerheart actual play series, The Shattered God, we're doing exactly that with the help from our friends and today's sponsor, Hero Forge. With Hero Forge, we get to design every detail of our characters and adversaries, from the horns on a fawn wizard to the intricate armor of a Dracona warrior. It's not just about digital customization either. we can actually have these minis printed and shipped right to our door. Now, whether you're playing on a virtual tabletop like we do in Talspire, or gathering around an actual physical table with your friends, Hero Forge allows you to hold your heroes in the palm of your hand, even offering custom color and dice options to match your character style. So if you're ready to bring your heroes to life like we do for the Shattered God, check out Hero Forge today. And a big thank you to them for sponsoring today's video. So let's head on over to our battle arena, where we'll find our 3 players waiting to do battle with 4 cult initiates and 1 cult adept. Now remember, Daggerheart is a fiction-first, narrative-focused system. We don't have initiative order or rounds or a set number of actions a player can perform. Instead, it asks the players and the GM to be mindful of the table and to fully immerse themselves in the storytelling collaboration happening right before their very eyes. So let's hop into this arena and see what we've got. So here we have our heroes. 3 level 2 players, a human wordsmith bard, a halfling divine wielder seraph, and a dwarf Call of the Slayer warrior. Now they face a group of tier 2 cult initiates and a cult adept in an arena filled with hazards. Now usually players only start with 2 hope, but these are tier 2 heroes. They've been adventuring together for a while, so let's say they go into this battle with 3 hope. And our GM in this situation has 6 fear, which I'll put right here at the top of the screen. Now the GM will start by narrating what's going into the scene, building tension amongst the players. As the gates creak close behind you, the roar of the crowd hits like a war drum. Dust hangs thick in the air of the stone arena, sunlight streaming down in golden pillars through the cracked dome above. Around you, scorched sigils and runes pulse faintly. This place was built for blood. On the far end of the arena, 5 figures emerge from the shadows of the opposite gate. Hooded, masked, and humming with dark intent. 4 are robed initiates, each clutching cruel, curved daggers. Their eyes glassy with fanatic devotion. But at their center, taller and cloaked with deep crimson, stands an adept, fingers twitching with arcane menace as shards of obsidian float just above one palm. The crowd falls silent as a horn blares. The arena is yours, if you can survive it. Okay, to start, the human bard recognizes the danger and wastes no time. They take the spotlight and they move forward to get within close range of the cult adept, opening with a searing speech aimed at the cultist, giving a stirring soliloquy and targeting their resolve using his enraptured spell. Now the bard rolls a presence spellcasting roll. They'll need to beat the adversary's difficulty found on their stat block, in this case, a 14. He rolls a 16 and adds his ability modifier, which is +2 for presence. His fear die rolls higher than his hope die, making this a success with fear. The cult adept becomes enraptured with the bard, focusing only on him. Instantly, the GM gains a fear token and takes that spotlight. Seizing the spotlight, the GM triggers a minor arena hazard. The floor plates collapse, creating a 10-foot pit. All of the characters in the hazards area must roll an agility reaction roll. Now the GM might look in the environment section of the core rulebook to find the appropriate difficulty and damage for this environment's stats. Now we can see here the difficulty is 14, and let's call the damage 2d6 + 3. Remember, a reaction roll doesn't generate hope or fear. The bard and the seraph succeed, but the warrior fails, sliding downward and taking 10 damage. Now the dwarf's thresholds are 9 and 17, which would make this major damage. They would need to mark 2 hit points, but instead the player chooses to mark an armor slot, lowering this to minor damage or 1 hit point. After resolving the damage, the GM decides not to spend any more fear and passes the spotlight back to the players. Now the seraph takes the spotlight. The halfling divine wielder charges forward, moving within close range right next to the bard, his radiant weapon in hand. He uses his feature, Spirit Weapon, sending his mace to attack an enemy within close range. He also marks a stress to target an additional adversary with the same attack roll. Now, the Seraph rolls his strength attack against the cult initiates, and the result is a success with hope. He gains 1 hope and gets to roll damage. Now, he strikes for 11 damage. Now, these adversaries have no thresholds and only 1 hit point, so the Seraph immediately vanquishes both. He turns to his teammate and offers to spend a hope to help an ally and get them out of the pit. He would then narrate how he renders assistance. He might say something like,
"Well, I reached down into that pit and offered my hand to Thorin."
Because they rolled successfully and with hope, the spotlight stays with the players. Narratively, it makes the most sense for that spotlight to pass to the warrior. So the dwarf, bolstered by the Seraph's help, attempts to leap from the pit. He rolls agility again. And remember, the environment's difficulty is 14. He rolls a 12 with hope. But the Seraph's help an ally gives him advantage. So add 1d6 to that, which is a +4, so 16. And that's a success. The dwarf takes a hope and leaps from the pit. Now, angered and fueled by the momentum of his leap, he chooses to keep the spotlight and attack the cult adept, who is still solely focused on the bard. He uses strength for his attack roll, and he rolls with fear. So the total amount is less than the difficulty of the adversary, and the fear die rolled higher. So he misses, and the GM gains another fear. The GM takes the spotlight back and immediately narrates how that failure with fear falls within the story. In this case, our dwarf friend lunges forward after his leap from the pits, but he loses his footing as he's swinging his battle axe. He's thrown off balance and tumbles to the ground. The GM has the spotlight, so it's time to shake things up. So the GM is going to spend 3 fear. The first is going to be used to remove the enraptured spell from the cult adept. Next, he'll spend another fear to activate this cult initiate, and 1 more to use its adversary feature. So the cult initiate has an adversary feature called group attack. This will allow all of the remaining cult initiates within range to move to the bard and make a shared attack roll. Now, the bard's evasion is a 12. And remember, the GM uses a d20 for their attack rolls. This adversary has +0 to their attacks, and they roll a 12, which meets the evasion and is a hit against the bard. Now, this adversary has flat damage of 5 per initiate. We have 2 initiates, so their group total is 10. The bard's thresholds are 7 and 13, so that takes this to major damage or 2 hit points. But wait, the Seraph is right there, and they choose to use their feature, I Am Your Shield, to mark a stress and absorb that damage for their friend. It's awfully nice. Now, this feature allows the player to use any number of armor slots to reduce the damage, though normally they would only be limited to 1 per attack. The Seraph takes the hit and uses 2 armor slots to negate all of this damage. Having just been attacked, it makes narrative sense for the bard to take the spotlight, and they opt to use the spell Wild Flame. He marks the stress and rolls a spellcasting roll. For the bard, it's presence, and he rolls against the adversary's evasion, in this case 13, and he gets a success with hope. He gains a hope and rolls 8 damage. And once again, these adversaries have no threshold and 1 hit point, so both fall to the bard's flames. And the GM will once again ask the players to narrate how this goes down. The bard might say,
"As I open my book and read a poem dedicated to the hells, flames fire forward from the tome, engulfing the cultists. Their robes catch fire as they are left lying in cinders."
The bard then moves forward to the cult adept and relinquishes the spotlight. The Seraph has an idea. He quickly grabs that spotlight, moves forward, and declares a tag team attack. The dwarf declines, but the bard agrees, and the Seraph spends 3 hope to initiate that tag team roll. So both the bard and the Seraph decide on their attack, and they both make an attack roll. Now, the bard decides to attack with their improved rapier, they roll with presence, and they get a 14 with hope. The Seraph, on the other hand, attacks with their improved mace. They roll with strength, and they get a critical success. Their hope and their fear die are the same value. So together, the Bard and the Seraph decide which role they'd like to use for both of their attacks. And in this case, obviously, they're going to choose the critical success. They would both gain a hope, clear a stress, and deal critical damage to their target. And this damage is going to be huge. And remember, critical damage is the maximum possible value of their damage dice, plus the rolled value for damage, plus any modifiers. The Bard's Improved Rapier delivers 2d8 plus 6. So you take the max value of 8 plus 8, which is 16. You'll take the Bard's rolled value, which is a 4 and a 2 for 6. The weapon's modifier, which is a plus 6, to get the Bard's total damage of 28. Now let's look at the Seraph. He's attacking with his improved mace, which offers a 2d8 plus 4. You take the maximum value, 8 plus 8, which is 16. The rolled value of 5 and 2, which is 7, and then you add the weapon's modifier, which is 4, making the Seraph's total 27. Now you'll add both of their damage rolls together to get an overall tag team damage roll of 55. This is going to inflict huge damage on this cult adept, and let's look at this adversary. This adversary's thresholds are 9 and 18, meaning that this overall damage for this tag team attack is more than twice the severe threshold, meaning they're going to deal 4 hit points of damage. Interestingly enough, that's the exact amount of hit points that this adversary has, so the GM may ask the duo to narrate just how this attack goes down. They may say something like,
As the other cultists burn, I run and leap forward over their smoldering remains, using the smoke to screen my attack. I shout my deity's name as I bring my mace down upon the adept's skull.
And then the Bard might continue.
As the Seraph leaps, I move forward with my rapier and slide to the cultist, plunging my blade upward. As the mace brings its head down, my rapier catches it on the way up.
And that's it. The scene is over. The encounter is done. So now you can see how the group used the narrative playing out in real time as a framework to determine when they should take the spotlight. So the fear of the GM taking that spotlight gives every roll weight, keeping the tension high and the momentum unpredictable. Notice how quickly the action escalates when fear or failure triggers a GM move, and how critical it is to manage your hope and your stress to avoid becoming overwhelmed. That is the heart of Daggerheart combat. So whether you're swinging a sword, wielding divine fire, or making a stand with your last hope, remember, the dice don't just decide the outcome, they shape the story. I hope you liked this breakdown. Please like and subscribe. Hit that notification bell so you don't miss any future episodes of You Can Certainly Try. If you have any questions or anything that you'd like to see broken down on the channel, drop it in the comments below. We are watching. And remember, our Daggerheart actual play series, The Shattered God, is happening right now. Join us every other Thursday as our heroes venture forth to unravel the will of the gods. And as always, dear travelers, I'll see you on Thursday. Take care.